Hello, in this video I'll talk about the theory behind value betting. The goal is to explain to you how to recognize value spots and how to maximize your profit when you're betting for value. In order to do this, I want to take you through the proper thought processes to use when you play a hand. This will of course also reflect and cover the relevant theory behind why you should bet for value. So first we look at the thought process for recognizing a value spot, then for making a plan for your hand, and finally we'll look at an example where I bet a hand for value. So how do you recognize a value spot? The thought process should look something like this. The first question to ask yourself is, how does my opponent's range look like? What you're looking for in a value betting spot is to be up against a weak, wide, or capped range, or basically any range where your hand is a big favorite. Which brings us to the second point. What's my range and what's my perceived range here? It's good to be in a spot where you can have both bluffs and value hands, since it makes it more likely for your opponent to call you down with a marginal hand. It's also good to be in a spot where your opponent probably thinks that you're bluffing because of previous actions at the table or previous hands you played against your opponent. The third question to ask yourself is, what's my hand's relative strength versus my opponent's range? Basically, if you're doing really well, it's going to be a clear value spot. So, how should your thought process look for making a plan for your hand? Making a plan is very important to ensure that you get the maximum profit from the hand. The thought process can look something like this. First of all, ask yourself, which hands or which type of hands do you want to get called by? Having a target calling range for your opponent helps you identify clear spots and also helps you make a plan because you can consider how many streets you want to bet for value or how big you can bet to get called by this range that you target. Which brings me to the second point. How many streets do you want to bet for value? And then on which street is it best to get that value? In many cases, when you play the top of a range, it will be a clear case of I need to bet 3 streets for value here. But in some cases, you hit a flop that's fairly dry, you don't need to bet to protect your hand for scary turn cards, and it's not really strong enough to go for 3 streets, then it's often a good idea to check the flop and keep your opponent's range really weak and be a bit deceptive about your own hand at the same time, allowing you to get perhaps even a bit more value on 2 streets betting turn and river than you would if you bet flop and turn. The next question to ask yourself is, which bet sizing do I use to set up the river shove? This is if you're going for 3 streets of value. Usually, when you find yourself on the turn, you need to think, how big should I bet to have less than a pot bet left for the river? Because you don't want to have a bet left that is bigger than the pot, because it can scare your opponent enough to make him fold a marginal hand. The fifth question to ask yourself is, which bluff do I have in this spot? Basically, just consider how balanced your range is. Having a balanced range, as I've already mentioned, is important because it allows your opponent to call you down with marginal hands. If you're only having very strong hands in a spot, you'll only get called by very strong hands as well. In this case, you want to consider the board and your bet sizing. Basically, which draws, which semi-bluffs can I have in this spot, how big would I bet with those, and then play your value hands the same way. If you're up against a very weak player, there's no point considering balance. If you know he doesn't care about this, he will call you regardless. All you need to think about is how big should I bet and on how many streets should I bet to get the most value out of this hand. The next question to ask yourself is, can I get more value by slow playing? If you're up against someone who's recklessly aggressive, it's usually a good idea. Finally, I just want to make the point that you should always be ready to make a new plan if circumstances change. And these circumstances are usually either the card that comes on the turn or the river, or an unexpected action from your opponent, which changes your perception of his range. Now, let's look at an example. We find ourselves in a 25 no-limit cash game with the action folded to the cutoff, who opens to 3 big blinds. We pick up ace king offsuit in a small blind, and this is a clear 3-bet for us. We pop it up to $2.50 and we get called. Just want to mention that previously on this table I have been 3-betting quite a lot, so I had a loose image. When our opponent calls us here, we can put him on a range mostly consisting of some Broadway combinations, a lot of pocket pairs, and a few suited connectors as well. I don't have any reads on this opponent, but on this level it's certainly possible that he's weak and calling with a range much wider than that. Like I've already said, his perception of our range should be that it's fairly wide since we have been racing a lot. Our plan with this hand on this board is clearly to go for 3 streets of value. Our opponent should have been 4-betting pocket aces, pocket kings, and ace king in this spot, so we're not afraid to be up against anything other than pocket 7s or pocket 4s here. We also hold the ace of spades, so we're not really that scared of a strong flush draw either. It should probably only be queen jack of spades and jack 10 of spades here, maybe a few others as well. So the plan for us here is to go for 3 streets of value, and we go ahead and bet the flop. Half pot should be enough to look, it's sort of the same size that I think in this case I thought I would bet with a draw. Betting big here looks very strong, and we want to keep our opponent's range fairly wide. The turn is a blank, and here we need to consider how big we should bet to set up a nice river shove. We want to have a bit less than a pot bet left to make it tempting for our opponent to call us down. So as you can see here, I'm going over different sizes in the bottom right. A good way to think is, okay, say I bet £5 here, or $5 here, my opponent called $5, that's $10 plus what's already in the pot, which is almost 20. Take $5 off his stack, and he'll have 15 left to call in a $20 pot on the river. So a $5 bet here would have been enough. I decided to make it a bit bigger than that, just to squeeze some more value out in case he does not call the river, and he calls, and we are set up for a good river shove. Just take some time here as well. We don't want to bet straight away to seem very strong, so we pretend to think about it for a while and then bet all in, and we get called by pocket 9s here, so you can see in the chat in a little bit. There we go, pocket 9s. That's all I had for now. I want you to focus on having the right thought process, because that's what's going to lead you to make the right decisions. Don't be too results oriented. If you bet for value and get called by a better hand, it happens. It's part of poker. Trust your methods and rely on a good thought process, and try to stick to that when you play. Good luck at the tables. Bye bye.